a lot of fun to listen to. Thanks, Chris. I don't want to take up any more time. They're both a lot of fun and both great guys. So we'll let you. Who's going to kick it off? Jeff?
Yeah, correct.
Hey, man. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, family. I am Jeff. I'm an alcoholic. I wanted to echo someone's sentiments that were said at the beginning of the meeting. It was really neat. Maybe not all of us, but we had an event last weekend in Colorado, and a great deal of us got to meet face to face. Some of us for the first time, and it was just so neat to consider your family. Lisa with her hands in the air, and I'll be honest, I'm kind of leveled that I'm like speaking. I mean, as the crow flies in a linear form, I probably got twice the time that Kurt has, and I am in awe of his connection to his work and his spirit and his God. Like, I'm nobody, I'm clear on that, but I do enjoy hearing him, and I do enjoy splitting a talk with him. And so I kind of took a couple notes, but I thought a good place to start, we're going to kind of dial it back and go all the way back to the problem, right? And so I was doing set up about 4 years ago with a from the Venice Beach, actually. And we were kind of going through the book, and he kind of dropped some things on me. I always love when you get an angle that you had never heard before, but we hit this line in We Agnostics, and it says, "Imagine life without faith!" Exclamation point. And he asked me, well, have you ever done that? And I thought about it, and I thought, no. And he said, well, listen, for the next couple of days, let's just imagine life without any kind of working faith whatsoever, and just kind of walk yourself through that and kind of get a sensory experience of what that would be like for you, and then write about it. The next time we talk on the phone, we'll talk about that. And you could take that as far as no faith in God, or literally no faith in anything, that the sun's going to come up tomorrow morning or anything else. And what I saw was a frightful sort of experience that would change who I was as a human being. I'd be trying to elbow my way up to the serving table everywhere I went, and anytime somebody died, it would be a psychiatric hospital admission experience. Like, well, where do they go? Do they just evaporate? I can't. What just happened, right? And there was this deep. But I'll tell you the truth. It wasn't a stretch for me to imagine life without faith, because all I really had to do was remember life without faith. And Kurt and I spoke about this at the dinner table the other night. And I don't know if the gravity in the way I think this or say this will come across when I say it, but I got to tell you, it was my direct experience until I was 30 years old that God wasn't real. It was my direct experience until I was 30 years old that it seemed like more than half the population were soft-minded people that took comfort in books that were thousands of years old. And why they did that, I don't know. And my life really had a hard and frightening edge to it. And that was just my experience. He couldn't have told me otherwise. Now, it's been my experience since November 22nd of 2002, exactly 18 years after I turned 30, the exact opposite. It's like walking around for 30 years thinking pigs can't fly. And for the last 18 years, I've been riding around on a flying pig, man. That's about as close as I can tell you of what my reality looks like from the inside out. It's just, it could not be. And I love that line in We Agnostics where it says, we are presently at pains to tell why we think our former thinking was soft and mushy. Like the 48-year-old me could never explain my viewpoint in my life to the 29-year-old me. He wouldn't have been able to hear it because it wasn't his experience, right? And so that's what I love the line in We Agnostics where it says, the consciousness of your belief system is sure to come to you. As my friend John Lee in Pittsburgh says, do the steps and you'll be contacted, right? And then you'll have an experience that will change what you believe. Anyway, I'm going to go back to, this was, again, going back a good number of years. And I was going, a lot of us use that sort of tipping point whenever we're going back through the steps again in Alcoholics Anonymous, like a lot of people in this crowd do, right? There's something very renewal, and we go back through the work. It's just what we do, right? And so, but sometimes I think you gotta take something to kind of thumbtack your first step to the cork board to like, so what is it we're taking through the steps? Because it ain't a drink. I haven't had a drink in my hand for many years. And so sometimes I think the easiest way to pin it down, we're looking for what is it? What's the current configuration of alcoholism as I'm experiencing it, that I'm trying to bring through the steps and have a new experience with. And a lot of us, the kind of go-to assignment is right about the bedevilments, right? We're having trouble with personal relationships, couldn't control our emotional natures, prey to misery and living, couldn't make a living. I love that one. Bedevilment number 4. And so this was a good number of years ago. I don't know when, but I was writing about that. And there's a lot of lines in the book that sometimes you can tell what Bill's saying by what Bill wasn't saying. And I realized one day, up until that point, every time I had read that paragraph, I thought Bill was saying trouble with our emotional natures, couldn't, so on and so forth, couldn't maintain employment. That's not what he said. Bill says couldn't make a living. And it occurred to me one day, well, what's another word for the word living? Life. Couldn't make a life that I or anybody else would want to be interested in. And I got to tell you, especially going back into my mid-20s, you guys, I don't know what your experience of active alcohol is. I said this from the podium. Actually, I meant to say this from the podium the other day. I say this in my home group all the time. At a minimum, and I mean at a minimum, alcoholism is extremely embarrassing, right? I just had a major incident like 2 weeks ago, but that's been my experience with it. But going back into my 20s, good God, man, I remember seeing somebody from grade school and they'd be like, oh my God, Jeff Gould, how are you doing? And I'm like, probably rolling down my sleeves and just like, what's going on with you? And they're like, we just bought a Daewoo minivan and we are doing yoga camp with the kids. And then we're going to Disneyland in the summer. And this one's riding a pony named Sparkle. And that one's at Boy Scouts and the older one's in softball. And whatever the struggles they may have had as a family, those weren't apparent to me at all. And if I sound cynical, I certainly was at the time. And they'd ask me, so how are you? What's going on? And here's the truth, guys. If I'm even in school, I'm on academic probation. I've got an email from the dean like, hey man, do you just want to withdraw or what? Like this clearly isn't your year. If I even have a job, I've already gotten some sort of verbal warning. Like the next time you're going to show up 2 hours late, don't show up. We'll mail your check. If I have a car, it's uninsured, underinsured, unregistered, riding on a donut. If I have a house, one of the 4 utilities, you better believe there's a pink slip where the electric company's like, hey, we're going to shut it off in about a week. If I even have a girlfriend, the police have been called 2 or 3 times, like you guys again, man. Okay, we're going to split this party up tonight because the neighbors are upset, all the screaming and yelling. And here's what I want to emphasize to you. That's when I'm really trying. That's when I'm trying to hold it together. That's when I'm trying to have a job and go to school and fall in love and be all the things that I see you being. And it's somehow not working because back then, like I just said, without faith, I had no anchoring principle to this life whatsoever. I remember one time in a psychology 101 class looking at some sort of basic, I don't remember it that well, but there was a basic age bracket at which we learned to get our needs met. And, the first thing we learn is breastfed, is food. And then this, but really high up there in that triangle of a basic need that gets met is a feeling of
Hey,
like,
Jeff, can you rewind that real quick? Your internet connection's broke up pretty bad.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I good, Sam? Okay. You know what? That was a stupid comment anyways, and I'm not going to continue with it. So I'll go in a different direction. Anyway, you guys, I had trouble making a living. And I think some of that was based on the delusion of how good your life looked from the outside. I didn't, those people, I mean, I know real life now. I know that those people probably struggled with plenty, but I had the delusion that they struggled with nothing because that's what I saw in the grocery store. And I also very much had, I don't know what anybody else found out in their inventory, but I have a selfish expectation of what I am owed in this life. And it caused me a deep pain. You better believe when my dad was remarried and me and my sister were shopping at Kmart and mom was penny and we only got to have McDonald's once a month because there wasn't. And then after we were divorced, my dad then made a fortune and remarried, and his new daughter had a horse and a sports car. You better believe that caused my heart pain because I thought I was owed those things, but that was half my trouble. I walked through life thinking I was owed a great deal. Why? Because I'm selfish and I think I'm special. And I look at your life, and that's where the source. There's an old band from 1977, the Buzzcocks, a punk rock band from the UK, and their big hit single was "What Do I Get?" You know what I mean? And I tell you, that resonates with me all day long. And so that's kind of some of the trouble I had coming in here, a life without faith based on what I was watching happen around me. And there was just no grounding. I mean, I guess if you would have asked me what my principle was going back to my life before, it would have been, I guess, for personal gain, but even that wasn't going very well, right? So there was nothing to anchor me to anything sane until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And of course, this has been the platform and the book and the way of life and the group of people that have taught me everything I know. And having said that, I'm going to toss it over to my good friend, Kurt.
Kurt, alcoholic. I'm just wondering where I want to start. So I'll start where Jeff did. I drank for effect. That's what I drank for. What was the effect? It gave me a synthetic connection to wholeness, peace, inability to not worry. That's what it gave me. When I got in the program, there's some people on here that I've known for 35 years. Good, close people. Randy's smiling up there. We could tell you stories. And like most of you guys know, I went out at 19 years. And there's a great line in Al-Anon. It says that we grow towards, it's evolution and maturation towards wholeness. And Don, said something to me when I was drinking in a little cubby hole in Newport Beach when my divorce papers were given to me. And he said, he asked me a question. The question was, were you serious when you took the third step in 1986? And of course I said, yeah, I couldn't have been more serious. I was surrendered. I had a revelatory experience that released me, and I was all in. And he made a comment to me that he told me, he goes, you're not going to understand this. But he said, all of this that's happening right now is all part of that third step decision. Now you tell that to a rational mind and it'll explode. But you tell that to somebody who is listening from a non-dual consciousness, like beyond right and wrong. And what he was saying to me, when I got released, I could totally understand what he meant. And what he meant was that we grow by getting off track. Then we get on track, and then we get off track, and then we get on track, and then we get off track. That's how we grow. That's one of the ways he taught me about that. He's told a story here about Johnny Looking Cloud, and where he had gone up to see him, and he had drawn a line in the sand. And Johnny Looking Cloud told him to walk on the line, and he walked on it, and he went up beside him, and he pushed him off the line. Don got back on the line, and And he walked a little further and he got on the other side and pushed him off the other side of the line. And he said, Don said he was really getting mad at the guy because, this happened 6 or 7 times before. He kept asking, why are you doing that? And he said, just get back on the line. And when he got to the end of the line, he said, turn around. And Don turned around and he looked and he said, you think this line is, he said, the red road. I'll say the spiritual path. He said, that's not the path. He said, the path is this. And he put his hands out. He was talking about the footprints and the line. He said, this is the path. And it was the first time I understood how you could constructively review your day. By getting off track, asking for a state of grace, for corrective measures to come in, and getting back on track. So this was the first time I really made sense to me, right? So when I read Bill's letter, I'm going to, Sam let me do this last time. I'm going to read out of a couple books just to get a sense of what I'm talking about. One of them is, some of you people have heard it. It says, when surrender is a tactic, it's just another means of control, another effort to impose your will on your disease. Surrender is beyond your power. If it weren't, you would have no need of a higher power. The genius of 12-step spirituality isn't that it teaches you to surrender, but that it exhausts you in the effort to surrender, so you last surrendering, and find yourself surrender. So what I hear when I read that is I hear a description of the pattern of reality, how it works, just what we read all the time. But my problem is, the first 19 years, I was interpreting this from the bondage of self. I was interpreting it from an analytical, narrative, thinking mind. I wasn't interpreting it from an intuitive, like Jeff said, the consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. The consciousness of my belief, what that revealed when that happened was, well, hell, I was trying to believe in something I didn't believe in. I didn't know that. I was trying to believe in something I was supposed to believe in. I didn't know that either. I could only see that from standing in the solution. I couldn't see it from the problem. So things started to make sense. So life took on a new meaning, like it says. And this is what I mean by the new meaning. The meaning was, I had been living out of an interpretation, a mental narrative of life, not life. And it's exactly why I felt angry and pissed off, because I was separated and I didn't know it. And all my attempts to get out of that position, of that narrative that wasn't real, just gave more proof and validity to the realness of it. It was, I was trapped. See, and I didn't know it. So this book, the last time I talked on this, one of the biggest parts I talked about in here was, because, nothing has any meaning except for the meaning we give to it, right? So when I read something, it stands out to me because there's something behind it. And what is this part right here? It says, I kept asking myself, why the 12 steps? Why can't the 12 steps work to release my depression? By the hour, I stared at the St. Francis prayer. It's better to comfort than to be comforted. Here was a formula, all right, but it didn't work. So I'll make a comment about this. The prayer wasn't, the prayer happened after his revelatory experience with the Creator. The prayer was an effect of that revelatory experience. Lord, make me an instrument of this peace. See, it wasn't a way to do something. It was an effect out of that experience. That's how the prayer came. So suddenly I realized what the matter was. This is the big thing. This is exactly what happened to me 11 years ago. Suddenly I realized, well, I didn't come up with that with the 5 senses. That was a revelatory experience and insight. Suddenly I realized what the problem was. The problem was for 19 years, I'd been managing my life with spiritual principles and I didn't know it. They weren't really spiritual principles, but they were my interpretation of spiritual principles. And all that will bring you to is a wall. That's all it brought me to. It brought me to massive more attempts to escape a place that was a narrative. It wasn't even real. It says it in our book. We're a victim of a delusion that we can wrest satisfaction if we manage well. I don't care if they're rusty handcuffs or gold ones. They're still friggin' handcuffs. They can be spiritual attempts or they can be non-spiritual attempts. They're all attempts. And I'm still stuck. Suddenly I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence. Almost absolute dependence on people, circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I'd fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression. Mine didn't come in depression. Mine came with the need to drink at 19. The need to connect. I was drinking for effect at 19 years, just like I drank before. And that was a blessing. I wouldn't wish that on the people that suffered it. A lot of them are in this meeting. I wouldn't wish that on them, but the effect that it produced, I wouldn't change it. So I'll give it back to you, Mr. Gould.
You are a tough act to follow, my friend. You're brilliant and simple and esoteric and a lot of things all at the same time. And I love your spirit. One of the things I was thinking as Kurt was talking, Kurt and I talked about this morning. I think I can kind of round this back to what we're talking about. I went to go see a psychic out of Chicago around a particular set of subject matter, and I'm a skeptic by nature. This, just so you guys hear me say that. But I thought of it as like spending $50 at the county fair, go ride a couple rides, blow $50, who cares? Except this person happened to nail me to the wall on 3 different sets of subject matter. And I'm a bright guy that I mathematically eliminated the possibility that, one, there was no way they could have known it, and there was no way they could have mathematically guessed at it. And so I don't know what this guy had, what his gift was, but he had a gift. And he seemed to be really in tune with, he said, I can see you've had some hardship in this life. And, in addition to having alcoholism and having gone homeless and having had a traumatic brain injury and thought I was possessed by the devil and I'd had my hand cut off and sewed back on in a car accident. You bet. I've had some trouble in a walk in this life that has, like I said, brought me to where I am. But he said, I want to let you know something. Everything that's ever happened to you bad here, you chose this for yourself. You were given a choice prior to coming here, and you chose this. He just said it's just what you chose. And I like that. It helps me align my own thinking. Believe this, I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my neck here, but there was a period of time, mostly back when I was in Arizona. I haven't prayed this since I moved to Dallas, but do you know I used to pray and wish hardship and suffering upon myself periodically? And listen, I'm not under any delusion that God's up there like, I was just about to give you a Ferrari, but since you asked for hardship, let's just drive your car into the ditch and make your life miserable. That, I don't think that's what happens. But what I think does happen is whatever was going to happen is whatever's going to happen anyway. But I said the prayer so I was in alignment with it. So when hardship and suffering or whatever did come, it's like, oh yeah, I prayed for this. I remember this. This is okay. And I've had 2 kind of different experiences with fear. And I think a lot of people are like this. Your first 4 or 5 years of writing fear inventory, I mean, come on, none of it ever comes true, right? It's like, well, I just have a brain that leaps 3 feet out ahead of itself and starts writing all this terrible stuff's going to happen. And then you turn around No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. But I want to talk about a deeper level of fear. And I think this is kind of what Kurt was talking about. Then I noticed about 7, 8, 9 years, the stuff that I was most afraid of. I was most afraid of being humiliated on the job. That was one that came up. I was most afraid of losing that job. That one came up. I was most afraid of going broke. That one came up. And the big one for me, I got to tell you, men and women and everybody here, I was in a relationship for a long time where I would just periodically, my heart would turn to stone. And if you were to ask me what's beneath that, what's that little fear that's all the way beneath that, where you pull up your stakes in your relationship and you just end up sleeping on the couch, even though you could be sleeping in your bed, blah, blah. But you know what that fear was? Is that my partner at the time, that she was going to die. And what would that mean for me? No, I'm here to tell you, God writes straight and squiggly lines, and it didn't exactly happen in back to back. But I want to tell you something. I did lose that job, and I did get humiliated, and I did go broke. And 3 years after we parted, that person did die after 11 years. But the beauty of this thing and this way of life is, in the middle of all of that, I was always okay. And so when I look back, there was a friend of mine in Tucson. He's like, dude, I remember that one time we were at Starbucks and you logged into your Bank of America and you held up your phone. I had $5, nothing in savings, 5 in checking. I was 13 years sober, you guys. It wasn't going great, right? And yet, even that month, I wasn't late on the rent. I wasn't late on my car payment. For all my worrying, I've never not had a drink of water. I've never not had something to eat. I've never not had a loving, kind person somehow embedded in my life right next to me. I've never been late on a bill, never been late on the rent, never not had a safe place to sleep. And so I guess what I learned out of that was, like, as a result of this thing called conscious contact, I'm always going to be okay. Now, do I get to pick what okay looks like? Not at all. That's the fun of the ride, right? We can't see around corner, man. I have no idea what's going to happen next. But what I do know is, looking back historically, is no matter what it was, and I can look back and say, all those sort of things, I don't know that they happen exactly for my. There was a guy, he wrote the book, The Secret. And he built a big sweat lodge out of plastic in Flagstaff. And about, I don't know, like 8 or 12 people died. They just had a stroke and died. It's a little too hot, the sweat lodge. And he said in his remarks to the newspapers, this is God testing me. And it's like, dude, God killed 8 people to test you. That's your interpretation. That's a little self-centered, right? But okay, So I don't know that my suffering's about me, but I do know, when I look back historically, things happen for a reason that probably have nothing to do with me. But as long as I've stayed on this path, I've always learned and I've always benefited. And Kurt, as he described the red road, I went a little left and I went a little right. And I've disclosed some things to Kurt that just in the past year that were very troubling and concerning to me. And we just talked it out. And this is the path I'm on. I'll say this, I may have shared this before. This is really what I have access to. And then I'm going to kick it back over to Kurt and let him kind of take us home or lead us into the conversation. And some of you guys have heard this story. I woke up one of those days, and it was one of those days where you can feel your recovery. I don't know if anyone will understand this, but I know what recovery feels like. It's like I'm wearing this warm skin suit that fits just right. And I could feel my hands and I could feel my feet. It's a body feeling for me of really being in recovery. And then there's this extra sensory thing going, well, anyway, I'll just take you to the story. So I wake up one morning and something about that house that 3 months ago, just some ramshackle place where I'm hanging my hat. But that morning, that house felt like home, and the little cracked tiles behind the sink. And I got that coffee brewing, and I can smell 10 layers of wet earth beneath the bean. I can smell the roots in the ground, and you kind of crack the window, and it's like somebody took a pastel paintbrush and just threw glue. And like, it was like everything had an extra sharp sense to it. And you turn on the radio, and that perfect song hits you. One of the things I love that Don Pritz said is, he said, always be on time. And I ain't talking about a clock, right? And so it's one of those days where the things and everything's just clicking into place. And I look at my grocery list, I got to get some groceries, man. So I go to Sprouts, Whole Foods, one of those upscale grocers, and I walk into the grocery aisle, or walk into the produce aisle, and this guy's got a New York Mets hat on. Now, here in truth, I never say this in truth. I don't know anything about baseball. I do know the Mets played a series called the Subway Series in New York against the Yankees, where everybody had to get on the subway to go. And so I just walk up to this guy. I'm like, what do you know about the Subway Series? He said, brother, what do I know about the Subway Series? Are you kidding me? And another thing, and the New York Rangers, and this, and that. We're talking, laughing. He's got his hand on my shoulder. He's laughing so hard, he's practically crying. I'm giving him crap about some of the produce. Like, I don't know about those eggplant, man. Those aren't looking too, and we're just cutting up, gigging, just getting down the road. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye, a woman had parked her grocery cart. She was just sitting there staring at us, and he's got his hose in one hand. We're talking, laughing, new sports weather, yucking it up, slapping. And finally, he says, look, I got to go on the back. I'll make sure to get those extra and greet, next time I'll have some fresh stuff, and we'll like that. So he goes back, and this woman who had been watching us pulls her cart up, and she says, I just got to say, I've been watching you two ham it up here for 10 minutes. And I think it's so great that you get to see your best friend while he's at work, and you guys just get to talk about stuff. And I said, with all due respect, ma'am, I've never met him before in my entire life. There's a line in the back of the book, maybe Kurt knows where it is, where it says people were drawn to us as never before. It's the us that we're drawn to. It's this light and this magnet that's happening inside of us, right? And people don't know why they're drawn to it. They're just drawn to it. Now, that's not what I have. That's what I have access to. God is either everything or he's nothing. That's not an exclusive point in time. On any given day, it's up for grabs. We have a daily reprieve, a stay of execution, right? Am I going to keep aware of the four things: resentment, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear? Turn all that over, internalize it, discuss it, make myself a void in a vacuum to invite this grace, and go walk down the produce aisle full of light? I get access to that experience. Or am I going to hold on to the resentment, anger, dishonesty, and fear, and have probably the exact pole? I may not have a terrible experience at the grocery store, but you better believe I'm going to be grumbling and groaning when there's 3 people in line in front of me, because that's my human condition, especially if I'm in my alcoholism. So that's kind of like what I like to remember, what I have access to as a result of work in a program or recovery. And Kurt, I'm going to hand it back to you.
If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free. Let me read that again. Then we can be set free to live and to love. We may then be able to 12-step ourselves and others into emotional sobriety. So I guess, the biggest, oh my God, how do you talk about? Well, I talked about this before. Here's the game we got to play. We got to talk about something that can't be talked about. And when I talk about it, I'm not talking about it. I'm pointing towards it. So that's the game we're going to play. It's the only thing we can do as far as this, unless we're we're a channel for that, meaning it's a way of living, meaning a way we treat people, a way we have respect. I couldn't do that with a narrative in my head. I couldn't do that when I had this voice constantly talking to me that wasn't me. It was the book, the way the book says it, it's the bondage of self. That bondage of self needs me to be an activity that acts through me. I'm not that activity. I'm much bigger than that. So is everybody else in this. It's just most of us, I know this because I've talked to a lot of people, we're identified with the voice. We think that voice is us. And the first way I was introduced to that was when I looked at the first step, and I looked at my inability to stay sober. I thought I was choosing. I thought when I went to the bar, I was choosing to stay there till 2 a.m. and then go home with a waitress and hide in her closet when her boyfriend came home. I thought that those were all bad choices. And it talks about it in our book. It says we were driven. I was driven physically with an allergy. I was driven mentally with a narrative, an obsession that outweighed anything I wanted to do. And then later in sobriety, I was driven by the bondage of self, sober. And I couldn't act my way out of that. There's a statement we say in another meeting, it says, effort only readies us for grace. Grace can never be willed or planned, only entered. That's the deal. That's what the step work's about. And, I'd like to read something else. Is that okay, Sam? If I read a little something else. This is some of you guys might know Keating. But he addresses this, the same way that what we read. It's just a different dialect of the same language here. It's Bill's depression and the unconscious, healing of the unconscious. He said, this is an important paradigm for people in AA. If it happened to the founder, it could happen to anybody. In one of his letters, Father Dowling, Bill W. writes about his depression and says that one day he realized that he had an enormous investment in pleasing people. That is, in being acceptable to everyone. The next day, he was cured of that depression. This is what he says. I was especially struck with this because it responds to my understanding of how the 3 basic instincts of child work once they're fossilized into energy centers around the instinctual needs for security, power, and control, affection, and esteem. The latter is what Bill called prestige. This emotional energy center was hidden from him until the moment when, in some way, he realized there was more work to be done, and he was open to a deeper revelation. This is that revelatory thing I was talking about. This doesn't come up in rational thinking, the rational mind. It's a download. It's a revelatory experience. What he was really saying is that his basic problem was not alcohol, but underlying that addiction was the need for approval. I'm echoing on somebody's. His desire for prestige was so strong that when it was frustrated or in danger of being frustrated, it sent him into depression. It sent me into resentment. A depression for some people might be less painful than facing the pain of their more fundamental investment in one of these 3 energy centers that are secretly controlled. They're secretly controlling their deepest motivation. Hence, their unconscious is constantly responding to this hidden fear of pain that alcohol successfully covered up. So, of course, do other addictions. The investment in one of these energy centers sets off what might be called the addictive process, the course of action that leads to an addiction is the last stage of trying to avoid the pain. That's what I was drinking. I was drinking for connection. And, you know, you guys, some of you guys know me, and you hear me say this all the time. I say, thank God I'm not suffering from what's not happening anymore. You know, that was that narrative. I mean, I could be sitting on this couch and I could make up a story in my head, and that story would create fear. It would create all kind of different stories. And I would create this sense of anxiety in myself, and not a thing was happening. I was sitting on a couch. I lived that way. When I got out of prison, I knew if they caught me drinking again, I was going to go back to prison. And I thought, oh my God, you're going back to Goree. Then you got to go through the walls in Texas. Then, like, now I've created this whole scenario that's not happening. I'm out, I'm free, and I got everything I need on the outside. And I'm a victim of this delusion. Until I saw that, there was no possibility to be free from it. Until I saw that, there was no, and it wasn't, I saw it, meaning effort. I would rephrase that and say, until that was revealed. And I think that's the beauty of like his language and his message in that emotional sobriety and a lot of his other letters. I mean, you know, we got to remember there's been 80 more years of this understanding. It's not just, this is in stone, it's the only thing. We've learned a lot more. And I think what he said when he said, be quick to see where religious people are right, not that they're right. That's not what he said. He said, be quick to see where they're right. The only way you can do that is with some kind of gift of discernment, of some kind of awakened state where that truth has a certain resonance. It doesn't have that flat sound that the intellect has. So I think, you know, kind of Jeff touched on this too. I mean, I think it's crucial what we really have, emphasis on really, is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And there's a couple friends that are a part of a meeting that I'm part of, and one of the guys in there says the best way to maintain a spiritual condition is to be a spiritual condition. This is a way of living. This is a way that God, which is our nature, is going to manifest in the world through us in 100 different forms. Thy will is being done. It's going to express itself through me. That's a unique way. It's going to express itself through Don. That's a unique way. Mitchell, Randy. It's like these are all expressions, just like the trees, the rocks, the birds, the fish. They're all expressions of this will. That's what I think it means when it says, may you find him now. It doesn't say yesterday. It doesn't say in the future. It says, may you find him now. And that's the whole deal. Is am I consciously, you know, I say get some popcorn, sit down and watch the show. Because that's what's going on. How am I going to participate in this cosmic dance? How am I going to participate? If I'm not here, I can't. If I'm involved in a narrative in my head, I cannot participate. It blocks me from the sunlight of the spirit, that narrative. So I think we're getting about time to wrap up and let some other people get involved here. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, man, whatever you guys think. Jeff, I mean,
Jeff, what do you think?
thank you so much.
You're muted, Jeff.
I'd like to hear what some other folks have to say as well, Sam. So,
All right. Well, let's, why don't you call on a couple people, Jeff, and then we'll open it up for comments and questions.
Okay, you bet. I'm gonna kind of. How about my van life friend, Don?
That's right.
Hi there, guys. Y'all were great. Thank you. Right at home, feeling right at home again. I was listening to you and I heard you reading the Rami Shapiro stuff, Curtin. I had an experience with that over the summer. I was at the beach. I was surrounded by wonderful, beautiful scenery and two girls I sponsor. We were tooling around, van life in it, had a beach house for free. And I was living in that, you know, stuff that hadn't happened. And I couldn't get out of it. And I made a moment there to check into a talk that Erica was doing somewhere. I don't know where, but I sent my sponsees off to get a cup of coffee, and I thought, crap, I'm gonna get some help here. So I turned. The only thing I heard Erica say was, I can't surrender myself. And I was reminded, oh, that's right. Oh, that's right. I can't surrender myself because I was trying so hard to surrender myself. God, why can't I let this go? Why am I, you know, why am I this? Why am I that? What am I doing wrong? And as soon as I heard her say that, I was like, oh, that's right. And the relief came at once. I stopped struggling. I stopped fighting, and I was surrendered. And I love the way that the idea that I have no power to surrender. I have to be surrendered. It's an act upon me, not an act from me. And it is through that desperation that comes, I mean, the first experience I had with that was, you know, hitting bottom with alcohol and just, you know, bouncing on the bottom of the floor and going, whoa, what happened? And I'd never experienced that myself. I too thought that I was choosing to drink and that I just really liked to drink, and that's the way it was. And I had no idea that I was driven. And that was one of my first experiences with being surrendered. And I love what you talk about, you know, when it says, suddenly I realized what the problem was. Not suddenly I figured it out. It doesn't say that. It says, suddenly I realized. And it's curious to me, you know, I got some situation today that I'm as I listen to this and I'm sitting here and I'm looking at a picture that Mary took of the bay with the sun shining across the bay. And I'm reminded that God is always there for me if I be the spiritual condition. And, you know, you know, oftentimes my inadequacy always feels, I don't go through a lot of social less than, or life has dealt me a heavy blow, because, you know, I have a pretty decent life. I've had stuff happen in my life. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had stuff that shook me. But the truth is, where I really feel inadequate oftentimes is in my relationships with my family. And I think I'm being presented with taking care of my elderly mother, which is way over my head. So I looked across, you know, in the van, there was a little picture of the bay and the sunshine. And I thought, oh, I don't have to take care of my mother by myself. It's that whole thing. God, please help me to be the daughter that you would have me be, not the one that I would have me be. And I might completely screw it up. But if I'm doing it from that place of sincerity and a desire to do the right thing on a momentary basis, I think, you know, I'll be okay. And I think my mom would benefit from it too. And as I heard Veronica reading, you know, maybe I could 12-step my mother into some semblance of emotional sobriety. She's had a tough gig. You know, she didn't get the chance I had with recovery in her life. So I appreciate both y'all sharing, and it just, this meeting makes me feel at home. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
How about Bruce? You want to share?
There you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce. I'm alcoholic.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, guy. And I'm now living in the same city that Jeff lives in. It's a whole new thing. Well, first of all, thank you guys for sharing. You both a lot of things, and like Don was saying, it makes me feel at home hearing this message that I identify with so strongly. You know, I've heard that essay read so many times. And so often at the beginning of the meeting, I kind of start to roll my eyes and go, Jesus, if I got to hear this thing one more time. And a couple sentences into it, it's like magic again, and it's brand new. But I'm always drawn to that line towards the, where Bill says something like the real flow. Like the real flow can't occur until we let go or get rid of these false dependencies. And it's about a flow, like the ability to manifest spiritual principles does not come through an act of will. It's not something that happens by me. It's something that happens to me. It flows through me. Like my real job here is just to be a conduit. And I heard a guy say years ago, he said, you know, my purpose, my job is to get my kink out of the garden hose. And it was just such a beautiful analogy. You know, like God's loving spirit is like water, and I'm the hose, and you are all the flowers. And of course, we all have our own hose. And the beautiful thing is when that water comes through me, it leaves a little residual part in me. And so everybody benefits from it. And like you always say, Kurt, I can fool myself by thinking that I'm manifesting spiritual principles, but I'm just using them through an act of will to manage my life. But it's not the same thing as having it flow through me. And so, like Bill said, the whole kind of challenge, the whole thing is, how do I bypass those things in me that block this flow? And I think that's really what 10, 11, and 12 are all about. And the irony is I don't really have the power to get rid of them. But it seems all I really have the power is to be willing. On a good day, by the grace of God, I have the power to witness those manifestations of self and be awake to the negative effect they have in my life and the people around me. And in becoming awakened to that, something in my heart makes me want to bypass that, to transcend that, and get connected to that spirit down inside me and live from that place instead of from that place of self. And but you know, I can feel those days when I am unblocked and it's effortless. And I find myself feeling compassionate towards someone that the day before I was resentful at or judgmental about. And like Francis, I do feel totally comfortable giving without any expectation of getting anything in return. And, you know, it's just a beautiful thing. So I'm really glad to be here today, and I'm really glad to hear what you guys had to say. And I just love the intention of this meeting. And I love the awareness that it brings to me when I sit here and listen. And so I'm really grateful to be here. And thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Kurt, do you want to pick on a few folks?
Yeah, let's just pick on a few folks here. Where's Mitchell at? Is he sleeping? Was he sleeping?
I'm right here. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Jeff. I think what I've been thinking about is, you know, the first thing that really was coming into my mind was the necessity for really having really gone through this amend process in depth, because, you know, when I really thoughtfully and fearlessly faced the effects I had on other people, unbeknownst to me, and really had this deep sincerity to take full responsibility and make things right, and then going through that process, it opened up a whole different emotional reality to me. because part of, to me, this emotional intelligence experience, the emotional sobriety, does involve the clearing out of these heart pains and these feelings of shame and guilt, and opening a space in my heart where I've faced people, listened to them, felt healthy remorse for what I did. And now I'm feeling unburdened. I'm feeling some of that freedom. And I also have experienced, I remember when I was in early sobriety, I was big into the 12 and 12. I still am, not just the big book. And I remember I was working a gig on a crisis hotline, and this one woman was sober a long time, and she was passing all the calls off to me. I was about maybe just a year sober. And instead of doing her job, she kept passing him off to my job. And I kept picking the calls. And at one point, I found myself standing in front of her, screaming at her at the top of my lungs in white heat anger. I just went out of my body. And the director of the program kind of pulled me out and said to me, "Well, I'm surprised this didn't happen 6 months earlier." My hands were shaking with rage and anger. I called my sponsor up. And my sponsor said, "You have no right to talk to another human being that way." And he opened up the book, The 12 and 12, and read that the spiritual axiom that every time I'm disturbed, there's something with me. And I remember sitting there, enraged with him. And he said to me, "Take a breath." And then he read the next line: "Kindness, courtesy, and justice will bring you into harmony with almost anyone." And that people are frequently sick. And he kind of was reading to me as I was listening to him. And then he said to me, "You need to go and talk to this woman and tell her that you have no right to talk to another human being that way." And this is where that effort meets grace piece is. And so I went to talk to, and I was thirsty at this point. I could smell scotch on the rocks. Could smell it. I smelled the drink, and in my head I was salivating for a drink. And I went and I looked in her eye and I said, "Listen, I was completely out of base, and I hope you can forgive me, and I'll really do my best never to do that again." And I sat down and I felt this calm come over me, and I had never experienced emotional calm without a drink. I never felt myself come down into a place where I went from the speed of light narratives about how I was a victim. Everything was happening so fast, because when I lose this connection to emotional sobriety, I'm immediately a victim. I immediately have a reason why. You're the reason why. It all happens so fast, the story about why you're wrong, I'm right, but when I sat back down into my chair and I felt this kind of calm come over me, we had said a prayer together to be willing to face this. And this active experience of on track, off track, facing people right in the eye with integrity and honesty, this brings about a freedom and a release, because, this fearless, rigorous honesty isn't just for the fourth step. And to me, so much of this emotional sobriety can flow out of, the 11th step and the 10th step, but it's also it's the human experience of realizing that when you practice real listening, you're no longer at the center of the universe. And so this communication and this intention, and then the covenant that God gave me to agree to, that I, do no harm. And so to me, a sobriety harming people is worth nothing to me. Do no harm. And so I bring that into the deepest part of my heart and soul, that I don't want to harm anyone, and I'll go to any lengths not to harm anybody. And tapping into the power and allows me to feel the strength and energy to do that. And as we know, sobriety is progressive, and there's a good feeling to be able to feel kind feelings towards people, and not to be caught up in this manifestations of these stories and the stupidity and the resentments and all the crap that goes on with distorted thinking. But it feels good to be kind. It feels good to be compassionate. These are the things that get released that we all have so deep inside of ourselves. So when those beautiful heart qualities get released, and you start to feel more at peace with people and feel that kind of willingness to love people without a hook, like Bruce said. And, the heart changes. And when the heart changes, life is sweet and relationships don't become a battle, and this, so for me, the deeper layers of the disruptions are, the demands, for my wife to be whatever. And I uncover those things, but there's a whole range of really beautiful human experiences that comes from learning how to make the coffee, learning how to be a greeter, learning how to go on 12-step calls, learning how to be part of this force for good that we're in AA that allows us to be, people who contribute and bring the love to life and not just, mooches filling our pockets with the shit we want all the time. So thanks for letting me share.
Thanks. Do we have any hands, Sam? Let me see.
Would anybody like to raise their hand? Come on, get in some of this here. Let's see here. Hold on. What
Nobody?
about Sarah from Richmond? We haven't heard from Sarah in Richmond a couple of days, couple weeks. Sarah, what's up? This will be number 2 for Sarah.
Oh, yeah. Jeff and Kurt, thank you so much. I am just blown away. I love your message. And Jeff, your little tuxie cat was walking behind you on your first share. So I love cats. So, I love when you talked about the narratives, because I went out after 5 years and I was absolutely doing that thing that you were talking about, practicing a mental recovery. And I didn't even know I was doing it, but I was doing the best I could. And, my third step that I made in 2011, just like Kurt was describing, it was absolutely true. I meant it from the depths of my soul. And, when I hit the 5-year mark, the narrative that I was telling myself at that time was, why isn't this working for me? Why don't I have the boyfriend? Why am I not making more money? Why am I living in this crappy house? And all these things. And I drank over it because I wasn't happy with where I was at. And I felt like God failed me. It took me 5 years to come back in here. And first of all, I'm so indebted to this meeting because it was tough coming back in COVID. I didn't even have the luxury of a fellowship to lean on. I had to shift my reliance on God from the get-go. When I landed in this meeting in November, you guys absolutely saved my life because it was rough, I'll be honest. But when I was hearing the message that you were carrying, my soul was hit and I knew that I had found my tribe. And getting to meet you all last week, it's just a God, there's just no words. And what's been happening in my recovery, it's like Jeff was describing, or I don't know if it was Jeff that said it, but it was Jeff, feeling my recovery. I'm surrendered in a way now that I wasn't able to do before, and it's automatic. And, watching those narratives has been huge. When I start feeling anxious, I'll catch it like, oh, I just invented some crazy story that didn't even happen, and being able to breathe into that, practice presence, very much in tune to my 10th and 11th steps now. It's just, I feel recovered in a way already at 9 months that I just wasn't able to achieve before. And I know it's a gift from God. I love Kurt's phrase, the revelatory experience. And I just, I can't even tell you how I did it. It just happened. That's the miracle of it. So thank you so much again.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hey, Jeff, you talked about that awakening and what it felt like to be awake. And there's that line in the book that says, most of us feel we have to look no further for utopia. We have it with us here and now, which is really what I got out of it. And I've had that exact same similar experience, where you were walking through the store, talking to the man, smelling the coffee, you know, looks like all the stuff is passed out. And you know, what's interesting to me is that it's taken me a long time to really understand that idea that I'm the fish I got to catch. And the problem is the unrest within me. I mean, there's also, you know, you talked about a lot of your fears coming true, and how you were okay in the midst of those. We talk about that a lot, you know. Another thing that's happened to me is that, you know, I've had some real successes in AA, some real, you know, what look like external victories where I've been a bit disillusioned, you know, not disillusioned completely. One of which was, you know, when you don't have any money all the time and you're always paranoid about how you're going to pay your bills. Next thing you know, you have all this money, and then you go, oh man, then this money comes and this money comes. And you're like, man, there's not a whole lot of difference between this money and this money. And there's not a whole lot of difference between that. I've been unrest with surrounded by people that I thought, or that liked me, or that had some level of respect for me, somewhere that I thought was geographically a neat place to be, with a lot of money, and been completely screwed up and angry and consumed with greed or consumed with fear about, you know, something. And I was wondering if you could describe the circumstances that were surrounding you when you had started to have that experience, and when you recognized when you were waking up, like when you were having that experience and you looked outside the house and it looked beautiful outside and you could smell the coffee and you had all that stuff going on. I mean, I know some of the most experiences that I've had that are that powerful have been when circumstances weren't really, you know, weren't always lined up right. And that was what made it so powerful, is that I didn't need them to do anything for me to have that level of peace and connection.
You know, that particular day, Sam, I don't remember what was going on. I will say this. The intoxicating nature of anything has a lot of allure for me, including the effect, you know, I get from Alcoholics Anonymous, in the sense that you guys, I don't know about anybody else's experience, but I never wanted the party to end. I used to do some stimulants, you know, that would aid and assist the drinking thing. And I remember 4:35, 5 o'clock in the morning, everyone's like, hey, you probably ought to go home. It's time to go to work. And it's like, I mean, genuinely be puzzled, like, why? Like, can't you, maybe you should call in sick, or you could just quit your job, or I just never wanted the party to end. As a little kid, I never want, even now, man, I get a little tear in the old eye when the Christmas tree goes. I don't want the Christmas tree to come. Why can't it be Christmas every day? You know what I mean? I don't understand. And so, you know, there's an effect I found in here, and to your point, sometimes it comes in the middle of something. Sometimes it comes, I'll tell you this, I've seen it happen to 2 or 3 people, and you could call it the presence of God. Some people would call it the Holy Spirit. I've seen a wind blow through the room, and something happened to somebody in the room I was sitting in that was very deep and profound and moving, and I was crystal clear something had happened. But I guess that's a big, long, roundabout way of saying, you know, I don't know what was going on that day. I would imagine prior to that I was probably running pretty clean. I bet there were probably not too many amends owed that day, and there probably wasn't anything that needed to be discussed. But you know, I was just telling my guy Jordan, like recently, like, we hide ourselves from ourselves. I mean, sometimes I got something going on. It seems like I'm the last to know. You know, I'm the last one in the equation. And sometimes when I clear that stuff out, though, I love what Bruce said. It's taken the kink out of the garden hose. Like I said, I like to think I always have a fighting chance, or rather a surrendering chance, at getting some peace in here. And peace, the good thing about peace is it's always so, peace and God's grace to me are not complicated feelings, man. There's something so simple about being in the moment and being connected to your hands and feet, and being connected to your lungs, and just feeling the sunlight on your face. And there's nothing complicated about that. You know, I told Kurt earlier, when I'm in a dark spot, I have these Nietzsche like profound realizations about how screwed up I actually am. And my life seems really complicated when I'm not doing well. But the answer, I love what the book says. Most good ideas are simple, and it feels simple when I'm in it. So anyway, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I was hoping you would get out when you said that. It's so interesting how much attention and time I spend to all these external things. And when my inside is clean and my amends are made and my meditation and all that stuff's happened, I can be in it right now. And I used to think, man, this is just some guy just read too much Eckhart Tolle and they're just regurgitating some shit they read in the last New Age book, and they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know how to live in the now or live in the present or any of that. And then you get a few times where you can actually live in the present, where I'm right there and living in that peace and gratitude. And it's amazing. It's so incredible. I've been kind of tied up in my head over the last few months, and it's just a beautiful experience to hear that. Let's see here. What about Veronica? How you doing, Veronica?
Hey, Sam, I'm good. Hi, everyone. Great to hear you guys tonight. You know, I most recently, and this is about, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had either this thought or the thought was given to me. And I thought, what if, and I thought of this, I remembered this when Jeff was speaking. It occurred to me that, what if the only purpose, my only job this lifetime is to remember that I am part of God? And it kind of, not so much surprised me, but it was like, yep, maybe. And then as I started sort of exploring, not on purpose, but just thoughts coming in and out. And I thought, knowing myself as I do, or what I do know of myself, and of all the experiences and of all the efforts and the trials and the trying this and trying that, I am really lucky that I am an alcoholic, because it seems to be so far that only through Alcoholics Anonymous and listening to and actively participating in, step work and meetings, and I pretty much suck at connections with other people, but I'm doing my best for now, is that might be the vehicle. That might just be the vehicle that, gets me to that, that my only job in this lifetime is to remember that, that I am part of God, that, that is the only connection that I really need to remember. So that's one thought. I've also recently experienced, and I've been trying for such a long time, I try and let this go, and I try and love it. And I've got I'm a pretty wound up person. I've been, I'm always on guard. I'm edgy. I'm just ready to react to something. And I try my best to look like a normal human being on the outside, but on the inside, that is not what it's like. And so my point is that I'm trying to, release this, this bondage of self, and and my difficulties and my challenges, and particularly around anxiety and control. They're like biggies for me. I'm actually quite shocked and sometimes laughingly surprised at how they drive me. So as I'm trying to release these things, and I got to a point it's only about 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I just went, I can't do this. And I found, and I started changing the I guess the prayer, or my dialogue to God. And that is, not that I am releasing, fear and anxiety and the need to control, that I now am praying that fear, anxiety, and control release me, that it lets go of me, rather than me actively letting go of it, which I clearly cannot do. And that seems to be helping. it's I'm going through an interesting time. I just bought my first American refrigerator. Well, actually, I bought the whole house that's wrapped around the refrigerator. But anyway, so the process of being a homeowner here for the first time, well, the first time in America, and going through all of that, and it's kind of, for me, it's a bit crazy making. There's a lot of stuff that needs to, it's settled that the house is mine, and it's the preparation and bits and pieces that need to happen, to move in there. But this process, that I'm wound up a lot of the time. I am anxious a lot of the time. There is faith in God, but my trust in God is most definitely questionable. I still operate like, yeah, I know you're there. Here you go, God, you do it. But I'm just going to check in every now and then just to make sure that, that it's all going okay. And I think that's really probably where I am. So it was nice to be reminded of those things. It's nice to be able to share them with you. Hopefully I made sense what I said tonight, and always happy to be here. Oh, and by the way, on a side note, Dawn, I've started Pray Minder since you mentioned it last week. Love it. My experience, I'm a person that finds something, well, that works well, so let's do more of it. So I went from, 6 prayers to, well, there's at least 12 waking hours, so let's do 12 prayers. Let's set a 12-hour period, and once an hour. Got totally overwhelmed, and I've now just dialed it down to a comfortable 6, and at least I get them done. But anyway, thanks, guys. Always nice to be here. And I always feel as soon as I start reading, it's a real privilege. I find it's, I want to say thank you for letting me do that reading at the beginning of this meeting, because I get a few words into it and I can just feel there's a difference in my whole body. Physically, I let down. Energetically, I let down. Emotionally, probably follows afterwards. And I want to say it's a real gift for me. Thanks for letting me do it.
Thank you. What about my man, Emerson? Emerson, what's up, man? Good to see you, buddy.
Hey, Sam, good to see you. My name's Emerson. I'm a recovering addict, alcoholic. Jeff, Kurt, thank you so much. I love this meeting. And I'm in the habit now of taking notes, and a few things that really got my attention today. And one of them was, you'll hear universal truths, or at least that's the way I heard it, in an awakened state. And for me, that is so true right now, because, I look at Kurt's library behind him, and I have a beautiful library, but I never opened any of the books. And when I did try and open these books, it didn't make sense because I wasn't in an awakened state. Not that I'm in an awakened state totally right now, but I'm much more awakened than I was. And that's something I couldn't force. That's a gift. That's grace. And I understand that. And I really loved when it was said that surrender on my own is another attempt at, of me controlling my disease. I know what real surrender feels like. On 5/10/20, I was surrendered by my higher power. The desire, the need to use drugs and alcohol was completely removed. And I didn't hear a voice or anything, but it was just like a calm, overwhelming presence. And I knew that I was done. And after that has mainly been like, okay, how do I live? What do I need to do to live? And the process has just been amazing. From Pat T to, JP, I've been blessed with, the big book talks about, there's a lot of literature out there. And so for me, like Anthony DeMello, Keating, Rumi, all these things that I was not able to read before, maybe even comprehend at any level, now they make some sense. And I'm able to incorporate some of what I'm learning into my daily life. And my life is getting better, it's getting calmer. And I love when Kurt said, sitting on the couch, you can just create this anxiety. And, I used to think, it was horrible. I'm one of the folks that had, I did some time in state prison. And there were times in there I was very fearful because, that's just the way it is. But I've lived more in anxiety out of there than I ever did in there because of what goes on in my head outside. And through this process, my head's been able to get a little quieter. And then the last thing is our higher power, my higher power meets me where I need him to meet me. And in working on my fifth step or going over my fifth step, my mom was in a wheelchair for 50 years, a little more than that. And I used to think, wow, she would have tried harder. Maybe she could have done better and da-da-da-da-da. So my God, as if it will, I just recently had some ankle surgery and literally I'm hobbled. I literally am hobbled. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, okay. All right, smart guy. Are you able to get around and do better? Can you do better, just by trying harder? And the answer was no. And so I get these universal truths for me through all these different areas. And I wouldn't change anything at all. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I need to be. And most importantly, this is where I want to be. I was and I'll just end with this. I was watching this documentary called Human. Really good. There's like 3 parts to it. And there was a gentleman that was, he lost the use of his legs. And he said, by losing the use of his legs, all his other senses got better. His sight, his hearing, his intuition, all these other senses got better. And he said, if God came to him today and said, you can have your legs back, but I'll take away everything else that you've got in the last 13 years, he said he wouldn't do it. And I kind of get that because, where I've come from and what I've learned on this journey, I can't replace with anything. There's nothing that can replace it. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, buddy. Kurt, Jeff, you guys want to have any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
I did want to tell Veronica, she should get a job like doing books on tape. When she read that letter, I was like, that's the best. That's the purest reading of that letter I've ever heard. The other thing I wanted to say, Glenn, Sam, excuse me, was, if I knew how to manufacture that feeling we were talking about, I would try to do it literally every single day because that would be in my nature. And that would go back to what Kurt was saying. I'm just trying to squeeze and wring something out and trying to manage a feeling out of this thing. But I'm just kind of I'm on the roller coaster for the highs and the lows, apparently, because there have been some of those too. But it's good to share some time with you. Thanks for the invite. And it's been good to share the podium with Kurt. So.
Yeah, great to hear from you guys, man. Great to hear you. Kurt, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I want to read the last passage of the book of the reading.
Yeah.
It says, nowadays, my brain no longer races compulsively into either elation, grandiosity, or depression. I have been given a quiet place in bright sunshine.
It's beautiful, man.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, guys. All right. Well, we usually close this meeting up by just muting ourselves, going to our inner room, and closing with the Lord's Prayer. Thank you, guys. Great to hear from you. So glad y'all came out. I needed this meeting tonight.
Absolutely. Everybody have a nice night.
Thanks,
Good to see
everyone.
y'all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Kurt.
Good to see you,
Still
JP.
there?
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night. Still there by chance?
Belinda.
Hi. Great.